Hello, and thank you so much for joining me today for another thought from the Bible. I have so enjoyed exploring Psalm 23 with you over the last few weeks. Isn't it just wonderful to know how much there is to get out of a really familiar passage in the Bible? God, our shepherd, who leads us to a place where we can rest, who guides us on the right paths, who walks beside us in those darkest valley moments of our lives. There are so many good promises in these 6 short verses. And today we're looking at the second part of verse 4 of Psalm 23, because there was just too much good stuff in there not to spend a little bit more time with it. It says, "Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. In the midst of darkness, in the midst of despair, in the midst of the evil surrounding us, our shepherd's rod and staff bring us comfort. Now, I had to do a little bit of research for this particular video because, as you've probably guessed, I'm not a shepherd who was living in Bible times, in the time of David, the author of this psalm. So I had to look it up and work out what was actually meant by that rod and that staff. It turns out that those 2 items were part of the standard toolkit, if you like, for a shepherd at the time. And both of those tools served specific purposes when it came to the care of and the protection of the sheep that the shepherd was looking after. Now, we know that David was a shepherd as a young man, and so he knew what he was talking about here. He knew what he was talking about as he painted this picture of God as shepherd. And I think that it can really help us and our understanding today if we have just a little bit of a cultural and vocational understanding about these tools, so that we can really get the wonderful meaning out of these words here and now today. So first was the rod. And this tool was made of wood. It was relatively short, but it was quite heavy, basically like a wooden club. That's what the rod looked like. And one of its primary purposes was to fight off wild animals. Now, David himself talks about this as he tries to convince King Saul that he's an acceptable candidate to go and fight the giant Goliath. David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it." Now, I think for a while I kind of had this picture of David like going in with his fists and just, beating up a lion and a bear. Makes a lot more sense if he had this wooden club with him, and that's what he used to strike those animals who dared to threaten the sheep of his flock. When the sheep were in danger, the rod came into play. But what does that mean for us today? How is that applicable to us? Well, when we today are faced with evil, when we are faced with danger, we do not need to fear, because our great shepherd, God Almighty, is our defender. Now, sheep are not strong animals. They're not predators. They are prey. And so a big part of the shepherd's role at that time was making sure his flock was safe from danger. Isn't that just a wonderful thought? We may face danger in our lives. We may face troubling times. We may encounter evil, but God, our great shepherd, is our defender. He is our protector. He is ready to step in at a moment's notice and take his divine rod to whatever it is that we may face in our lives. We do not need to fear. Just as the sheep don't need to fear when the shepherd is near, we don't need to fear because our God is more than able to defend us. He is our great champion. See, and another purpose of the rod, that tool that a shepherd had, was actually for counting sheep. We read about it in verses like Leviticus chapter 27 verse 32 that says, every tithe of the herd and flock, every 10th animal that passes under the shepherd's rod will be holy to the Lord. Now, I don't know exactly what that looked like, how a shepherd used his rod to count, whether it was kind of pointing out the sheep with them as they walked past or giving them a little tap as they moved into a new field. I don't know. But I do know that a shepherd knew how many sheep were in his flock. And as he counted them out with his rod, he would know the instant one of them was missing. And that is an amazing thought to us today too. This is the God, our shepherd, who knows when I sit and when I rise, who discerns my going out and my lying down, who is familiar with all my ways. This is the shepherd who cares about you so deeply that he recognizes the moment that you stray. You are not just a number to God. You are not just one of a crowd lost in a sea of faces in this world. You are precious and cared for. You are beloved. You are known to the shepherd. You are noticed. In a world filled with billions of people, God Almighty notices you. That is encouraging for us to remember. So that's the rod. But then there's a second tool that a shepherd had, the staff. And this looked a little bit different to the rod. It was longer, it was thinner, and it had like a hook at one end of it, at the top of the staff. And this tool was used primarily to direct the flock. Its purpose was to keep the sheep out of danger by keeping them close to the shepherd, by nudging them in the right direction. And I love this quote from a book called A Shepherd Looks at Psalm 23 by W. Philip Keller. It says, in a sense, the staff, more than any other item of his personal equipment, identifies the shepherd as a shepherd. No one in any other profession carries a shepherd's staff. It is uniquely an instrument used for the care and management of sheep, and only sheep. It will not do for cattle, for horses or hogs. It is designed, shaped and adapted especially to the needs of sheep. God knows what you need. He knows how to look after you. He has everything that he needs to do that unique job. He is not messing around with your life. He's not learning on the job. He's not experimenting on you. God is equipped and perfectly skilled to guide you, to protect you, to lead you, and occasionally to correct you. So I've said it before in this series that sheep are not the cleverest of creatures. They have a tendency to wander off to places where they shouldn't be, to fields that they think might have some good eating in them, even if it's dangerous to get there or to be in that place. Sheep will eat just about anything, in fact, regardless of whether it is something that is harmful to them. We are so good at doing the same, aren't we? How often do we consume what is unhealthy for us? Whether that's a few too many hours spent scrolling through social media, thinking how our lives couldn't possibly live up to those little snippets we see in pictures of the perfect lives of others. Whether it's engaging in an activity that we know isn't helpful for us, that we know is harmful for us even, that may lead us into sin. Whether it's listening to those doubts that tell us that we are not worth anything, that we're not worth the attention of the shepherd, the little whispers that lure us away from the safe place that God has led us to. And that's where that crook, that hook on the end of the shepherd's staff came into its own. Because when a sheep had maneuvered itself into a position that was precarious or dangerous on the edge of a cliff or in a hollow somewhere where it couldn't get itself out, the shepherd would come in and put that hook around the neck of the sheep and pull it to safety. That action wouldn't harm the sheep, it wouldn't hurt the sheep, but I can't imagine that it felt very comfortable. And it kind of reminds me of a picture that we find in John chapter 15, where Jesus said, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, He prunes so that it will be even more fruitful." The process of pruning, though, it doesn't sound very nice, does it? Like the process of being hooked around the neck as a sheep. When you prune a plant, you literally snip bits off of it. I remember having a beautiful rose bush in our garden when we lived back in the UK, and I remember looking up how I was supposed to care for it, and this guide said that I needed to basically prune it right back to sticks before the winter. And I did it, but it didn't look pleasant. It looked as though I'd killed the bush, if I'm honest. But the next spring, it burst into life. It burst into glorious colour with more flowers than it had ever had before. Correction can be painful. It can feel unpleasant. And yet what an incredible comfort it is to know that our God, our Almighty Shepherd, cares about us enough to want to correct us. It would be way easier for him just to leave us alone to do whatever we wanted to do. But he loves us so much that he won't leave us in the wrong place. He will correct us. He will bring us to the place that is the best place for us, even if that place happens to be in a darkest valley in this moment, because he sees what comes after that valley. God will not leave you walking the wrong way. He will not abandon you to a bad decision. He will lovingly, gently, but firmly direct you, just as that shepherd would with his staff. Your rod to protect and your staff to guide. They comfort and console me. Be comforted today. Be consoled. Be reassured. You are not alone in your life. You are not abandoned. The great shepherd is with you. He is leading you and guiding you and defending you and correcting you and working all things together for the good of those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose. You are loved today, and that means the shepherd will never abandon you to your fate. What an encouragement that is for us. In love, he will not leave us in places harmful to us, but will gently guide us back to where we should be, sheltering in the shadow of his wings. And all that we need to do is be open to that prompting, to be open to that nudging, to remember that he is our great shepherd. Thank you so much for joining me for that thought from the Bible today. I'm sorry if that was a little bit long, but there's just so much good stuff in this psalm. I will be back on Wednesday next week as we start to dig into the next verse of Psalm 23. So I will see you then.